relationships with people that are care experienced and also who are interested in the legal profession. So my name is Amber and I'm a member of the Lawyers Who Care Volunteer Committee, and I'm really delighted to be hosting this webinar tonight. It's a topic close to my heart. I'm a personal advisor working directly with caregivers for refugees. Oh, hello. Sorry, someone's just joined. If you could just mute your mic, thank you. So yeah, I'm a personal advisor working with care leavers who are refugees or in the process of claiming asylum. And this group has a unique experience, having gone through both care and also immigration systems, which we all know are both very complex systems to navigate, even if English is their first language. So really excited for the speakers that we have tonight. We've got 3 fantastic speakers today. So they bring insights from all sides of this experience. So I'm just going to do an agenda overview and I'm going to hand over to Stephanie, who's co-chair. So the first speaker is going to be Jo Schofield, who is a social worker. And then we have Becky, who is a solicitor. And then we have Jamal, who has his own experiences that he wants to share. And then we'll finish off the webinar with a time for a Q&A. So we've got quite a lot of people here. So if you want to try and keep your questions till the end, that would be great. So I'm just going to hand over to the wonderful Stephanie Harrison, who's going to be taking over hosting from me this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amber. Yes, and I'm very pleased to be part of this important webinar focusing on the journeys that unaccompanied asylum-seeking children face before they come to the UK, and then, of course, what we focus on in particular, what happens to them once they get to the UK. My own background is as a lawyer working in the field of asylum and immigration, and that has involved over the years quite a lot of cases concerning unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, often where their age has been disputed and they find themselves in detention or increasingly prosecuted for immigration-related offences, as well as the substantive rights for children in terms of their access to services, accommodation, health, etc. And so many of those topics that I've been working on in my practice are going to be discussed today. We are going to have questions at the end, but it may be that if you have a question as we're going along, you can put it into the chat. And I should say that as well as this webinar being available later, because it's going to be filmed or it's going to be recorded for YouTube, there is a webinar pack that has been put together by Lisa Marie Elliott from the organisation Lawyers Who Care, and that's going to bring together a toolkit for supporting young refugees and asylum seekers based upon some of the material that the different speakers will refer to, as well as some helpful material that will help you, we hope, in terms of your work in supporting young refugees and asylum seekers. We know from those who've signed up that we've got a very good spread of people with expertise, both in the social work context as lawyers, representing young people in the grassroots as social workers and other organisations supporting young people, and also from local authorities. So we would really welcome and hope that there will be an opportunity at the end for this to be an interactive session so that we can not only contribute our knowledge and learning, but learn from yours too, because ultimately that's got to be in the best interests of trying to promote the welfare and interests of some of the most vulnerable children in our society. And so with that very general introduction, I'm really pleased to be able to first introduce our first speaker, Jo Schofield, who, as Amber said, is a social worker, but that's only really the beginning of her expertise. I think she's one of the leading experts in the country in advising and providing training and consultancy to a variety of organisations, including local authorities and law firms, on how to introduce best practice into the assessment and treatment of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. She has worked both with central and local government in frontline practice, giving expert advice on legislation, on case law and policy in respect of unaccompanied children. What she's going to focus on tonight is to give us, from her perspective, an overview the journey of an unaccompanied asylum seeking child, what you can expect in terms of the circumstances in which such young people turn up at the border and what happens to them thereafter. And one of the aspects that she's going to focus on, as well as giving us her insights into that journey, is about age disputes, which obviously is an important part of the and can be an important part of the young person's experience. So over to you, Jo.
Thank you, Stephanie. If you'd like to write my CV afterwards, I'd be very, very grateful for, for you to do that. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to Lawyers Who Care for inviting me to participate in this webinar this evening. So, kicking us off, as Stephanie highlighted, I am going to provide some kind of general overview and insights into young people's experiences, sort of pre-migration, during migration, and post-migration. I'm also going to focus a little bit at the end around some legal difficulties experienced by the young people pretty much as soon as they arrive. And I know that Becky will be talking a little bit more about that later on in her presentation. So kicking straight off, pre-migration, where are young people coming from? Well, we have the benefit of working with young people from all over the world. And honestly, for me, that's the best part of this job. I really enjoy working with young people from lots of different cultures and with experiences and things like that. But predominantly the countries that our young people are coming from are in this list here. So Afghanistan, Albania, Eritrea, Iran, Iraq, South Sudan, Syria, and Vietnam. As I said, this is not an exhaustive list. We all work with young people from all over the world, but these are kind of the sort of largest populations that we see in our separated migrant children cohort. Why are they leaving home? Well, there are lots and lots of different reasons as to why young people decide to leave. The most common one that people think about when we're talking about this client group is sort of conflict and danger and fleeing that. So this can either be from war, so particularly in countries like Sudan at the moment, Democratic Republic of Congo, there's Palestine, there's lots and lots of wars going across the world, which is forcing people to flee in large numbers. It can be abuse, so it can be abuse either by the community, by the family, so young people will often leave in order to seek safety from that kind of experience. It can be persecution, so persecution on the grounds of maybe their religious identity, LGBTQ plus issues, things like that. It might be their political belief, that they might be persecuted as being part of a minority group that does not sit well within their their country of origin's government policy. Or it might be sort of recruitment into armed forces or militia. Again, this is quite a common experience in people as they reach a kind of age of maturity, which depends on which country you are from, will mean that young people are often quite vulnerable to being recruited. They can also come to the UK or come to Europe for one reason, but actually be tricked into it. And I know that Becky's going to cover this in a lot more detail in her presentation. But young people will often come to the UK thinking they are coming here for a better life. For economic reasons, they come to get a job in order to provide money for their family back home with the promise of a good, stable job in the UK. But the reality is often very different. They're often forced into debt bondage and will be forced to work in, things like cannabis farms, car washes, nail bars, brothels, all of these kind of environments, and be exploited in the process. It may be due to family reunification. So some young people will come to the UK, especially if they've lost family members back home, because they often have family members over here. And we see a lot of this with our care leaving population, actually, our care experience population, I should say, that we have a lot of older siblings who have younger siblings now coming to the UK. So they're making this journey afterwards and they're trying to relocate with their older siblings, which is a lovely piece of work if you get to do it. It's really, really nice being able to match young people who are newly arrived with older siblings in the UK. It might be for education purposes. They come to the UK because they feel that they would have better life chances by coming here. We have a good education system in Europe, and if you've never experienced education because of war or poverty or deprivation, then actually coming to Europe to better your life chances can be a real pull factor. And then we have climate change. We don't have lots of, in my experience anyway, we don't have a lot of asylum seekers and refugees come into the UK for reasons of climate change, but it is something that I think is what the research is telling us. This is starting to happen, that people are on the move as a result of climate change disasters. So I think, for example, countries like Somalia, there are places where they cannot grow their own food anymore because of climate change, and the ground has effectively died. So they can't produce their own food, which is meaning that people are not able to survive, and they're having to move en masse across to other countries. So we're starting to see this kind of migration of people that way. Like I said, we don't tend to have many young people for those reasons, but it's something to kind of maybe keep an eye on going forward. How do young people become separated? It's not always what people think. Some young people do become separated whilst escaping difficult situations. So, for example, you might have a young person. I was talking to someone recently whose village was attacked in the middle of the night, and he happened to be sleeping in a different area to his parents and siblings. And as the village was attacked, he went one way and his family went the other way, and that was it. He's not seen them again. So it can be very, very quick, obviously very traumatic. Parents have also, they can send their children away for their own protection. So, for example, young people who are being recruited into the militia, parents will often the militia will come knocking and say, look, we're going to come and pick your son up tomorrow, make sure he's ready. And the parents will go, yeah, sure, we'll do. And then, of course, the parents are sending them away very quickly in the night because they don't want them to go into those armed groups where they're, being recruited as child soldiers effectively. Lots of young people leave without their parents' knowledge, and that can be to escape abuse or violence or to protect the family. Sometimes families are at risk if the government finds out that their child has left for Europe. That can place their family members at risk. So some young people will make that decision on their own. And this is actually something that comes up quite a lot in age disputes, where young people are disbelieved because they've taken that decision independently without their parents' permission. But actually, there's quite a lot of research out there now demonstrating that young people kind of 13, 14, 15, 16 years old will make decisions to leave without their parents' permission, either because it's the parents who are who are placing them at risk, or more commonly to try and protect their parents, or to avoid the parents trying to convince them to stay effectively. Parents can become ill or die during the process of migration or before migration, and that can happen. I have lots of experience with supporting young people where they actually left with their family members, but their family members didn't make it. Borders are policed really, really harshly in some countries, and it's very, very difficult to maintain those family connections as you are migrating, especially in periods of conflict or trying to cross a border or something where there's some tension there. And children can become separated from their parents during migration. I mean, there's quite a high profile case currently being talked about in The Guardian that's happened in England recently, where a small family group tried to cross the channel with two small children. Mum was pushed into the water, couldn't swim. Dad jumped in to try and save her, and the two children ended up in the UK, and the parents luckily survived, but they're now in France, and there's this so they've been separated again in those sort of circumstances. So all of this to say that children and young people and their parents and families can get separated in lots and lots of different ways. During migration, I love this map because it just shows how chaotic the migration routes are across the world. As you can see, that there are lots and lots of different ways in order to enter Europe, but we do see some common experiences that happen quite frequently to our young people. This is a really, really harrowing read, but one I'd recommend you have a look at if you've not already familiar with it. There is something called the Fatal Journeys Report, which I believe is done. I want to say it's done by UNHCR, but I'm not entirely sure. And what they document is well, what it says on the tin, really, how many people are dying as part of their migration journey. And volume 4 specifically looks at unaccompanied minors. So it's a harrowing read. It's not pleasant, but I think it's important. For me, what it does is it looks at the different migration routes and the kind of risks associated to young people as they go on these routes. So the first one is the Western route, and I like to put this picture up because this is this is what it's like in Morocco. You can see in the foreground, you've got people playing golf. In Melilla, I think it's in Melilla, which is a Spanish enclave in Morocco. It's kind of a tiny little part of Moroccan soil that's technically Spanish. And in the back, you can see you've got this huge wall that's been erected of people trying to cross over, because if you can kind of land on that side of the fence, you're technically on European soil. So you can see how the kind of stark differences of how people are treated along their migration journey. Not lots of young people come through this route because it's quite tricky, and you tend to get stuck here. The Central Mediterranean route, these are normally crossings from sort of North Africa to Italy and Malta, normally departing from Libya. This is one of the ones that you tend to see on the news a lot. We have lots and lots of people dying on this route quite regularly. With a rise in kind of migration rhetoric politically, we start to see that this is now impacting our young people. So, for example, the Italian government have done a reduction in search and rescue efforts for people in the sea, which what that means is more people are dying in the sea, which includes children and young people as well. I don't know if anybody's watched that documentary on the Netflix, The Swimmers, but one of the sisters in that documentary is, I think she was being prosecuted for trafficking or smuggling charges for her work rescuing people out of the sea. And then we have the Eastern Mediterranean route. This is slightly changed. It used to be kind of sea-based routes going up from sort of Turkey to Greece and Cyprus. However, what we're now seeing is a lot more land-based crossings. So coming up from Turkey into Bulgaria and Serbia. Now, these borders are policed really, really harshly, and young people are subject to all sorts of abuse and ill treatment along these ways. The worst one I've heard was a young person that told me on the border between Bulgaria and Serbia, he was attacked by the police dogs. So he had nice scars along his arms where the dogs had got him. And the police officers thought it'd be really funny to melt plastic bags on his head. So he had scars where his hair had not grown back because of the plastic that had been melted onto him. So all of this to say, the migration journeys are not easy, they're not pleasant, they're abusive. That, you know, a lot of young people will often say that their migration journeys were almost more traumatic than the reasons why they left home, because at least the reasons they left home they were familiar with, they knew what was going on there. The migration journey, they had very different expectations. So we have this kind of pre-migration trauma, this during migration trauma, but the thing that we don't tend to talk about is the post-migration trauma and what young people are subject to when they come to the UK. So I think Amber was mentioning earlier about how our young people are subject to all of these processes right from the point that they arrive, which is hugely complex to navigate as a professional with experience in this field, and absolutely mind-boggling if you are a young person, so you're under 18, without any kind of support network, in a language that you don't understand, and you know, trying to navigate that with a professional who's still trying to work their way through it is hugely, hugely complex. So you can see kind of down the right-hand side of this flow chart, you have these sort of looked after children and leaving care services. So just to highlight that any young person that arrives that is under the age of 18 and without a parent or guardian looking after them will be entitled to exactly the same things as our citizen children in care and leaving care population. They should be treated exactly the same. They are entitled to the social worker, the care plan, the IRO, the pathway plan, all of those things that our citizen children are entitled to, these young people are entitled to. However, as Amber highlighted, kind of running parallel to that is this huge, complex navigating asylum system that they have to navigate. And it's not easy. It's very, very complex, and it can take a lot of time. Someone described the asylum process to me once. They're a researcher looking at the impact of the asylum process on children, and they described it as slow violence. And I thought that's a really, really clever way of describing the asylum system. The asylum system is not designed for children. It's not designed for young people. It's designed to be hostile. It's designed to deter people from staying in the UK, and subsequently the young people are kind of subject to that. The kind of comparison I like to make for those of you who work with children in care or in care proceedings, you know, we have a whole system in place in the UK to avoid drift and delay in care proceedings, don't we? We have something called a public law outline that is designed to reduce the impact of drift and delay on care proceedings, because we recognise as a nation that drift and delay has a massive negative effect on children's wellbeing and development. We recognise that in our practice for care proceedings. Yet we don't apply that same logic and application to children in the asylum system. We allow them to kind of sit in these asylum systems for years without representation, without stability, without any kind of permanency. And we see the negative impact that that has on young people on a day-to-day basis. Once they've kind of gone through the asylum process and they've finally got a decision, that's not the end of it. They, you know, even when they get these positive statuses, so the sort of refugee status or humanitarian protection, they get 5 years leave to remain. Again, that is not a permanent status. That runs out after 5 years. If you do nothing with it, you are therefore here without permission after those 5 years. You can now apply for indefinite leave to remain. However, as in, I don't know if any of you have heard, but recently in the last couple of weeks, the government have now removed the right to apply for British citizenship for anybody who arrived via irregular routes. So again, there's no kind of sense of permanency. If, however, you are refused asylum, you get to go through this whole wonderful appeals process, which is incredibly traumatic, time consuming, and can take a number of years. It's a very, very complex system. You're very likely to age out during this process. You're quite likely to sort of turn 18 and go into kind of leaving care services, where we know that support naturally drops off, and therefore leaves young people quite vulnerable. Some kind of common challenges that I just sort of wanted to highlight before I hand over to Becky. One of the big challenges that we are seeing for our young people at the moment is the lack of access to legal advice for asylum claims. There is a real sort of legal aid desert across the UK at the moment, where young people are really, really struggling to get that independent legal advice in order to process their asylum claim. This adds delays. It also reduces solicitors' ability to support them through the appeals process. So now what we're seeing is a huge increase in solicitors saying, we can't support you with your appeal because we don't have capacity. We don't think there's enough opportunity of success, and therefore we're sorry, we're going to have to step back. And we're seeing young people having to represent themselves during the appeals process, which is just unacceptable. Age disputes. Now, this is my bag. I do age disputes all the time. Young people who are newly arrived will more often than not, be age disputed at the border. Young people who arrive, especially those who are arriving into Kent, will present as physically older. Migration journeys, sleeping rough, being away from home for a year, 2 years, however long that migration journey takes you, you will look physically older at that initial point of arrival. And subsequently, what is happening is we are seeing a huge, huge increase in the number of young people who are age disputed at the border. I think some kind of research out there conducted by, I think it was Helen Bamber and maybe Refugee Council. I might be wrong about that. I'll have to check that one out. The statistics are suggesting that actually these age disputes are being raised incorrectly for about 50% of the population. So 50% of the young people who were assessed as significantly older, they've been told that they were adults at the point of arrival, were actually later found to be children. And this has all sorts of implications, and we're starting to again see some patterns now emerging. I think Stephanie talked about this earlier, where we have young people who are being arrested, charged and prosecuted for illegal entry offences, and being given prison sentences accommodated with adults in prison for significant periods of time before they're later found to be children. This is the worst one I've heard, is a young man who was caught. I say caught. He happened to have his hand on the tiller of the boat as it was being steered across the channel, and Border Force caught those pictures on their cameras, and he was prosecuted for assisting people to come into the UK. But also, unfortunately, a young girl died on the boat that day, so there were discussions around charging him for manslaughter. He was assessed at the port but as an adult, and has later found to be a child, so has gone through a whole kind of potential manslaughter case, which he should never have ever have been considered for. He was an incredibly vulnerable young person, and the smugglers take advantage of those. We know that smugglers in Calais will say, like, look, I'll give you free passage, just hold on to that. Because of course, if you are a smuggler, you are not going to be the one holding the tiller on the boat, because you know you're going to get caught. We also have this thing called the National Transfer Scheme, so moving children around the UK. We have a large cohort of our young people arriving into Kent predominantly. After Brexit, most of our young people are now coming in down there rather than kind of being dispersed via lorry routes. And so we have this thing called a transfer scheme, which enables the sort of fair distribution of young people across the UK. This is overall a positive thing, however, only if it's done correctly. And we do see young people either getting stuck in the system, so they get settled in one place and then hoisted out and moved somewhere else, to another area where they've got no support network, or they're being moved far away from family members. So they're saying, like, look, I've got a brother in Leeds, and then they're being placed in Wales or somewhere. So these are all kind of problems that we need, and challenges that we need to start overcoming. And with this sort of introduction of the National Transfer Scheme and the mandatory nature of that, we do see local authorities struggling. Some local authorities are absolutely wonderful at this work. They are amazing and huge, strong advocates for the children they support. Amber is in one of those teams I know quite well. However, there are some local authorities who have never done this work before, and that's not a reflection on the social work practitioners, but you don't know what you don't know. And so there's a real kind of catching up process for young people, or for the practitioners supporting the young people in order to be able to understand and meet their needs. So yeah, lots and lots of challenges. But I sort of just wanted to end, for those of you who are maybe thinking about coming into this field of work, that it is genuinely, and I know I'm completely biased, but it is absolutely the best type of social work you could possibly do. Like, it's an absolute privilege and an honour to be able to witness these kids come from arriving in the most worst circumstances with the worst trauma you ever see, to then becoming like the most wonderful, well-rounded, grounded, lovely young people you will ever get the opportunity to support. So I just sort of wanted to finish on that. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jo, in bringing to life both the horror and the glory of working with unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And I think it's right always to start from the traumatic nature of the journey, the experience in the home country, the journey, but also to really focus on how re-traumatizing and undermining of the person's resilience is when they get to the UK, when they think they're safe and they think that things are now going to get better. And in fact, they don't. They face the obstacles of these complex systems. And you're lucky if it's only the complex system rather than the prospects of some form of detention or imprisonment or prosecution. So it's really important to recognise that, but also to recognise what the difference is if you had a welcoming approach that did put the fact that they're children first rather than migrants or asylum seekers first. Just to put the point that you raised about age dispute. So the Home Office's own statistics are that they are getting it wrong in the significantly over 18 category in between 56 and 60% of cases. And that includes the cases of children who've been wrongly prosecuted as adults. So their statistics are not complete. But they fully reflect the information that was obtained by the Helen Bamber Foundation and the Refugee Council, and also Humans for Human Rights. I always get that wrong. There was this joint report that opened up and began the basis for ongoing challenges to the Home Office's policy on age assessments. So we'll see that those challenges are coming to fruition now. And so in that context, obviously, the access, as Jo has said, to legal advice is a key important route for a young person being able to navigate the system and assert their rights. And we're very fortunate to have Becky Cutler-Methven. I knew I was not going to say that right. I'm so sorry, Becky. I apologise. Who's a solicitor from one of the leading firms who do provide a comprehensive and excellent legal services to asylum seekers, including unaccompanied asylum seekers. Becky qualified through working at Wilson & Co. And she has a specialisation generally in immigration and asylum law, but in particular in the rights and welfare of unaccompanied young people. She is going to talk about a number of issues, some of which have already been touched upon, but starting off with the legal rights and entitlements, particularly under the Children Act for unaccompanied children, looking at the kinds of support that there is or should be able to access in terms of healthcare, mental health services, etc., and also focusing on one of the aspects of the abusive situation that can accompany the journey to the UK, which is trafficking and modern slavery, which is unfortunately a common experience for young people, both in terms of leaving what the reasons why they leave their country, but also what happens to them on their journey. So apologies again for messing up getting your name wrong, and I'm over to Becky.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I wanted to thank Jo first for such a comprehensive overview to be aware of for young people that we all interact with. Claiming asylum is basically an incredibly hostile and dehumanizing experience, and it's really important to always highlight when we can that we're talking about one of the most vulnerable groups in the world, and they just need a great deal of empathy, which they do not get from the people they should expect it from. A lot of the things I will say are summaries of issues that are really complex and detailed, and I could go on for hours about all of them individually. So I hope what I provide here are the key aspects to be aware of, particularly if you work with young people, whether that's legally or in to do with their pastoral care. I just think this will really help understanding what they could do with more support with when they're unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. The first thing I wanted to discuss was trafficking and modern slavery and the risks that are generally posed to unaccompanied children, because they are more vulnerable to experiencing this than basically anyone else in society, I would probably say. And I wanted to flag the importance of looking for indicators and go briefly over the legal definitions just to be aware of, as well as how this can impact criminal prosecutions they can experience in the UK, and also where they're housed in the UK, for example, in hotels compared to supported accommodation, and how something like that can increase the risk of exploitation they could experience. So when it comes to definitions and indicators of trafficking and modern slavery, I want to preface this by saying those working with children in care in terms of safeguarding, trafficking and modern slavery, although they have different legal definitions, are equally likely to happen to unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in care, or people that have been on the journey with them could have exploited them. So it doesn't matter if it's modern slavery or trafficking, they're equally vulnerable to have experienced both. And they're both equally important to look out for and flag if you think any child you're working with has experienced this. Since the Nationality and Borders Act came out in 2022, Part 5 of that Act confirms the definitions and elements of trafficking under UK law, which we didn't have previously. And this links the definition of modern slavery in the UK that's been in place since 2015. It's very important to know that asylum-seeking children can be victims of both modern slavery and trafficking, and these experiences can take place internationally and domestically. They're not just things that happen in their own country. They're not just things that happen on the journey. A lot of the trafficking I see young children experience is in the UK. We're not immune from that happening here at all. Modern slavery includes labour exploitation, sexual exploitation, domestic servitude, criminal exploitation. This all includes human trafficking as well, but modern slavery covers other scenarios that don't meet the human trafficking definition as well. Human trafficking is a much more narrowly defined experience, and it involves the arranging or facilitating of travel of another person, child or adult, with a view to exploiting them. And that includes travel within a country or across international borders. So human trafficking will involve the recruitment, usually, or movement of people specifically for exploitation. And this can be done through threat, force, fraud, or abuse of their vulnerability, which is very common for children to experience. Many children I work with are trafficked for all or part of their journey to the UK, and most have no idea they've experienced that. What's really important to look out for if you work with unaccompanied asylum-seeking children is look out for the indicators that the people will not see in themselves that they have experienced something like this, or they could still be experiencing it in the UK and have no idea that that's what they're going through, potentially because things like that could be a norm that they've experienced before. I would always encourage, obviously, taking a lot of detailed information from young people you work with regarding their journey to the UK, their experiences in the UK, and it's unlikely any of them will ever say they were trafficked or experienced modern slavery. These terms are never used by any of the children I work with. Children are never required to have been forced or coerced or tricked into being exploited. They do not have to give consent to anything they've ever experienced for them to have experienced trafficking or modern slavery. The exploitation they go through can experience many forms. So it can be sexual or organ harvesting, often for criminal exploitation such as drug mules or carriers or beggars on the street. Most commonly with the children I work with, I see it in the form of criminal exploitation and sexual exploitation. And most children do not want to disclose they've experienced such things. What's really important to remember is that exploitation as well as abuse can be the same. They're not mutually exclusive. I've had a lot of people I've worked with, particularly in the local authority, who are very aware that people they work with have experienced abuse at the hands of family members, but won't know that they've indicated it's also potentially been trafficking if they were transported or if they were held captive by people that were abusing them as well and forcing them to do other things. Something that's very commonly misunderstood is that smuggling is not trafficking. Smugglers move people across countries. They do bring people to the UK. They assist people with their journeys. A lot of young people call them the agents of their travel. Smuggling is not trafficking. It's not modern slavery. And a lot of the time that word is used interchangeably with trafficking and can cause a lot of confusion on a young person's case. I've seen a lot of people in files being said to have been trafficked when in fact they've been smuggled to the UK but haven't indicated they experienced any exploitation or were moved for exploitative purposes. So it can get very confused because, of course, all children will have been smuggled to the UK most likely in a lot of the examples we have, but not all of them will have experienced exploitation. As I said, trafficking can happen in the UK or any other country. Young people will rarely know their victims, hence they will probably not disclose it for a very long time, if at all. And it can be incredibly common that you do not find out they've experienced something so harrowing for years after they arrived in the UK. And that's not them trying to hide an experience. There can be a million reasons why they might not disclose it. That could be cultural, it could be gender related a lot of the time as well, depending on who's working with them, and them just not understanding what they've been through. A lot of the young people I work with who've been sexually exploited were so young when it happened to them. They didn't know that's what they were experiencing, therefore how to describe it. I would really strongly advise anyone to determine as urgently as possible if they think that there are indicators of modern slavery or trafficking being experienced by any of the young people I work with. And this is because trafficking cases for unaccompanied minors are referred for assessment in the UK through a government mechanism called the National Referral Mechanism, or the NRM, we call it most of the time. And they're assessed as to whether they meet legal definitions of modern slavery and trafficking by a part of the UK Home Office called the Single Competent Authority. I haven't gone through the whole process of assessing for modern slavery and trafficking here, but the resources that we're going to provide do, and I'm very happy to answer any further questions about it, but it's a long process. It's very arduous for young people, but it's important it gets started as soon as possible because it also offers them additional support. Once indicators of trafficking or modern slavery are found for a child, the local authority has a duty, statutory duty, to pursue a referral to the NRM and assessment with the SAA for all these cases. As first responders, as what the local authority are known of, to start the process of determining whether the child was definitely trafficked or experienced modern slavery. Procedurally, some local authorities are incredibly aware of this process and are really on it and know exactly what to do. Others are not, and a lot of that seems to depend on how many cases they experience to do with modern slavery and trafficking, rather than whether they're doing their jobs adequately. I've never met a social worker that doesn't want to do their job incredibly well, but sometimes you don't experience having a lot of children who've experienced trafficking, and therefore why would you know how to start the process? So I would always advise getting legal advice where you can if you think any indicators of trafficking or modern slavery have cropped up with young people you work with, because it's a very arduous and stressful process to go through yourselves as practitioners and also as the child. And a lot of evidence is required for the assessment, and it takes a long time. And I would suggest you want all the support you can for that referral and assessment process to be made. In terms of relating to criminal prosecutions, it's sadly very common when a child is trafficked in the UK and exploited that they are exploited for criminal purposes, and they end up committing criminal offences generally in the UK. For example, a lot of the time it is drugs related and carrying certain things and being asked to do things by certain communities they do not feel they can say no to. A lot of them end up arrested and prosecuted without being aware of the mitigating circumstances involved in their case. This can cause significant delays to their asylum process and further issues to their asylum claim being considered down the line. Criminal lawyers are not often trained in detecting these elements and don't often put forward trafficking defences in time. So, for example, the defence of duress and Section 45 of the Modern Slavery Act, which confirms victims of trafficking can push against criminal prosecution when they've obviously been trafficked for the purpose of committing the crime. And these elements are really important because I've had a lot of young people I've worked with who've had criminal lawyers who I've not been aware of and didn't know that that was something to look out for because it's not their job to notice those sorts of things. The next part relates to how a lot of children are becoming more vulnerable to trafficking when they're placed in hotels. This is becoming so much more common in the UK when young people are not put with the adequate supporting care services they should receive, whether that is supported accommodation where they have a lot of support workers around them if they're old enough, or foster care. Children in hotels often go missing, whether that is for short periods of time or long periods of time. Hundreds are recorded missing currently, and that's just as of last year, and that's just the ones that are recorded. I've worked with children who arrive in the UK, claim asylum, put her in a hotel, and then they're left to just wander. They get lost, they disappear, they can experience further exploitation, and they pop up later, months or even years later. Their case hasn't been properly considered, and they're even further down the line of trauma that they will need to recover from. And this also links to the age assessment matter that Joe discussed, where being age assessed, you can easily be put in a hotel very quickly on arrival in the UK, even when you shouldn't be. A lot of young people go missing in such circumstances, even if they're found to be children later and only given the support they're entitled to much further down the line, which frankly isn't acceptable in my view. The next topic I wanted to talk about relates to mental health support for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. Now, I'm not a mental health practitioner, but I have seen firsthand how valuable and life-changing it is when an unaccompanied child is given regular pastoral care and mental health support when going through a really dehumanizing process that is claiming asylum. I'm going to highlight what young people are entitled to as unaccompanied children, although Joe definitely flagged most of it as well. I've become aware quite a few times that young people and those caring for them aren't sure what they're entitled to because the Home Office does not make it clear at all, as far as I'm concerned. So first, NHS entitlement. Unaccompanied asylum-seeking children can use the NHS as though they are British citizens. They do not need to pay for using the NHS, and that includes being referred for mental health support within the NHS. Unaccompanied asylum-seeking children should be registered with GPs as soon as possible. I can't stress that enough. I think whoever is supporting the child should also do their own assessment of the child's mental health before they go to the GP for the first time, and then flag themselves any concerns they have. GPs can register children and then refer them for CAMS, mental health support, very quickly. But children will often need help engaging with a GP who probably isn't like a doctor they will have experienced in their own country, or may never have been a doctor they've engaged with before. They will likely need an interpreter, which the NHS should provide and rarely does. And many young people want mental health support but don't feel able or comfortable requesting it or know how to vocalize it. So it's really down to those working with them to help really interpret what it is they are asking for and they need to avoid delaying it. I also wanted to highlight something I thought was important, which we've probably all experienced if we work with young people, and that is the emotional problems that going through this whole experience can cause for them. I've worked with so many young people who've been labelled different things throughout their asylum experience, and a lot of the time their problems aren't considered mental health issues. And there ends up being a delay in getting them the support that they need. I watch young people start a case with understandable anxiety, but then as the system progresses, and it's cruel and it's slow and it's confusing, they become angry, they become detached, they often don't want to get involved in their case anymore because it's so upsetting. And the local authority are often aware of these issues, but sometimes it can be sporadic when mental health support or engagement is offered. A lot of clients I've had don't know who to ask for help or what to even ask for because they've never been in a situation like that before. I would say it's safe to expect mental health will decline for anyone going through this asylum process, even if a young person seems perfectly fine at the start. I would reevaluate it as often as you can, whether you need to make a referral from them. The waiting lists are long, and it can't hurt offering them additional support to experience all of this. Depending on where the young person is as well, they can get additional support through certain charities and organisations who offer mental health support, whether that's through additional referrals for therapy or group sessions and support that a lot of young people can benefit from. So, for example, Off the Record Counselling is an organisation we work with a lot, and it offers mental health support through experienced therapists who specifically work with unaccompanied children, and they're specifically offering support to children in Croydon, Merton and Sutton, where a lot of children are in care at the moment. And then the South London Refugee Association and Young Roots are charities that offer a lot of practical support for young people. So helping them book appointments, remember to turn up to interviews, helping them keep track of paperwork, things that sound relatively minor but can make or break how well your asylum claim will go. And they also offer community support and group engagement, which helps stop you isolating yourself a lot of the time. The Refugee Council also offers groups like that as well, and I just strongly recommend as many referrals as you can make for young people be made. I also wanted to flag that if your young person has a legal representative, if you are worried about their mental health, tell the representative. It is our job to look out for these things, but if we don't know what's going on in their lives beyond our appointments with them, we can't offer additional help. And sometimes there is funding for mental health reports to be obtained on their cases, and any referrals from the mental health support can then help with other engagement with practitioners later down the line. So I just advise a much more as holistic an approach as possible to make sure everyone's involved in their care. The last thing I wanted to talk about, which Joe definitely touched on, was the rights and legislation and just general entitlements that children in care, and particularly unaccompanied children, will have. So under the Children Act 1989, Section 17 and Sections 20 will predominantly apply to unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. So Section 17 confirms that the local authority will offer provisions of services for children in need, their families, and others where relevant. And it's the duty of every local authority to safeguard and promote the welfare of children in their area who are in need. And as far as is consistent with that duty, to promote the upbringing of children by their families. Section 20 says every local authority should provide accommodation for any child in need in their area a lot of the time. And in more detail, it looks to provide accommodation where they do not have any parental responsibility or person with parental responsibility involved in their lives. They've been lost or abandoned, or the person who is caring for them has been prevented from providing them with suitable care. Most of the children I work with are looked after under Section 20 because that's where unaccompanied generally comes into it. Local authorities in England have specific duties under Section 17 and Section 20 to look after children that are unaccompanied in society, whether they're British or not British, it doesn't matter. And that's the same in Ireland and Wales, and Scotland, just under slightly different provisions. Unaccompanied children will be considered children in need under both of these sections, so they should be receiving local authority care. They should not just be left to find support elsewhere. They can use the NHS, as I've said, but they can also study at school without having to worry about paying any ridiculous fees or anything like that. They cannot receive benefits like universal credit and things like that. That is limited from them, unless they enter the UK or have a visa already in place permitting this at the time they claim asylum. This tends to happen with people that came under family reunion and then claim asylum in their own right before their visa expires. They will continue to hold all the same rights under their family reunion visa if they've claimed asylum before it expires. So it slightly varies with people like that who are entitled to additional rights that an unaccompanied asylum-seeking child who had no visa originally cannot expect. Legal aid is something that all unaccompanied asylum-seeking children should look to receive if possible. If a child is in care and claims asylum or intends to and does not have significant savings, which I've never experienced one having, they will be entitled to legal aid for their case. I would always advise, where possible, if you're working with a young person, to try and refer them to a legal aid practitioner urgently, as deadlines after claiming asylum kick in quite quickly to prepare forms, to prepare witness statements, to send things to the Home Office. They kick in whether you're a child or an adult, and they don't provide extensions unless someone is requesting them. And a lot of this can negatively impact the child if they're not getting the legal advice they're entitled to as soon as possible. As I said, the supporting charities I've spoken about can help with looking for solicitors, because a lot of the time the local authority doesn't automatically know where to go to, which makes a great deal of sense. Refugee Council also has a lot of really good connections, as well as the Law Society. And the final thing I wanted to flag in this section was the Red Cross. They offer a lot of things in relation to unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, but generally the most important thing to discuss with them is family tracing. It's not always successful, but sometimes it is, and it's one of the most profound things in the world when it is successful. And they can help local authorities try and look for the family members of young children in the UK or those that might still be abroad. And I've had people linked up with their family members in Europe somehow through that system. Doesn't always work, but it's a rolling investigation and doesn't cost them anything. And I would always advise trying to get a young person to have a meeting with the Red Cross if they've lost their family, because that can offer them hope that they desperately, desperately need, I think. And I just wanted to conclude with, I wanted to say something about why I feel this is such an important area of law and why I feel it's so important that I and other people work in this. Children are the most vulnerable group in society, whatever society you're in. And unaccompanied asylum-seeking children are additionally vulnerable on top of that through no fault of their own. And they don't deserve to be treated with hostility. They deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, and they don't experience that enough. And I just think everyone who's involved in their care, working together, offers them the best chance of experiencing that kind of dignity and a good process of their case. But yes, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Becky. It certainly would be good if that was the foundation of our asylum system. I just comments on a few things that you said to follow up on that. The issue about hotels and trafficking, there was a legal challenge to the Home Office and Kent policy of not taking children into their care, and instead they were accommodated by the Home Office in hotels, and there were 6 areas where there were hotels. But what we discovered through that litigation, the litigation was brought by ECPAT. It's a fantastic organisation, which is another organisation that we should put on the list of really excellent resources. But also by Brighton and Hove City Council, who I acted for, and they had a hotel in their area. And they didn't want them, although they were a city of sanctuary, they didn't want to have children in their locality with no one supporting them, with no local authority properly acting in their interests. But what was interesting in that litigation is that the Home Office had to disclose a report that they themselves had commissioned, that they hadn't published, about their policy of housing children in hotels, which itself said that it was a really significant factor for exposing children to trafficking. So they knew full well, and they still do know, that policy and that practice was likely to give rise to what was a very stark safeguarding failure for large numbers of children who subsequently went missing, many of whom are still missing. So if it was important in your cases where you're challenging accommodating any young person in a hotel, we could pass on that report, because the Home Office themselves know that there's a connection between that form of accommodation and the risk of being re-trafficked or trafficked. And then just in terms of other resources that might be helpful, because one of the things about accommodation, especially hotels with young people being moved regularly, is the disruption to their education. And as you said, education is a right for all children. It does not depend in any way, shape or form on their status, but it does have very disruptive impacts on education if you're moved around a lot. And of course, if you're in a hotel, it's not a conducive environment to be able to study, whether you're an alone asylum seeker or with your family. And recently, there was a report produced by Together with Refugee Children and the Public Law Project, which was just launched on Monday, which has documented the experiences of young people who are accommodated in these forms of temporary and inappropriate accommodation, which again, it will be something we could put into we could provide afterwards. So certainly there's a lot of material that's available that can help you to support advancing the young person's rights. And if you're a young person in local authority care, then obviously without having a parent to act in your interests, which is one of the reasons why all of these children, whoever they are, have a vulnerability, because they have no parent by definition, then those are the kinds of things that would be important for social workers and others in the system to be aware of as well, so that they can advance the young person's interests and rights. So our final contribution is from Shamal Mohammed, who is, as we heard from the outset from Joe, one of those young people who has shown what a difference it can make if you're able to provide support and a stable environment and to get through the asylum system. He's a master's student, and he's also involved in the lawyers support in the organisation that's the organisation that's promoting this seminar, and the Lawyers Who Care. Sorry, it's gone out of my head. I couldn't think what the W was. Lawyers Who Care. I'm having a problem today. My job as an advocate, failing on that. So the Lawyers Who Care. Shamal is on the steering committee and plays a really important role in giving life to the experience of young people who manage to traverse this system, but also to make a success, and shows what can happen if you do have a system based on respect and dignity of the kind that Becky says we ought to have. Shamal.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks to both the speakers. I think they mentioned everything it has to be mentioned, but yeah, so just a quick background. My name is Shamal. I'm originally from Iraq, and when they told me about the topic and the webinar, I really wanted to get involved, because that's not something I read about it or I learned about it, but that is something I've been through, I lived. So I came to the UK alone when I was 15 years old. So just what Joey said about the journey, I just want to put it into a picture. My journey from Iraq to the UK took me 6 months. So it's just 5 hours flight, and I had to go through the entire journey by myself alone. And in that journey, no matter how old are you, no matter what's your age, you have to be a man. So that's the issue, is like most of young people are like on that journey, you cannot be a kid and waiting for somebody to give you a hug and saying, "Oh, it's going to be all right." You have to handle everything by yourself. Just a quick, I have to be in the boat for 7 days. You see nothing else but the water. So on that 7 days, I did not believe. So like, why I'm so grateful to what I have now, because this is like my second life, because I did not believe I would survive there. So I saw people who didn't make it. I saw people who left behind, and that is not something you can get over really quickly. That's why I decided to study law and be able to help the people around me. Maybe I've been through what I've been through. I cannot make anything better, but maybe I can help somebody who is going through it right now, and I would be able to help it. So and as they mentioned, with the help, basically I'm not the first one who've been through that experience. There are thousand and thousand peoples who've been through that, and they I I want to speak about my experience and my journey to be able to educate ourselves and learn from each other, and what the young people and what the asylum and accompanied asylum seekers have been through. So like, having the journey is a hard part. It's not easy. You seeing everything you shouldn't see at age 15, but the harder part is, I believe, when you arrive to the UK. For example, from my experience, I came to the UK with no I didn't have any family, any relatives, or speaking a word of English. So imagine being age of 15 years old and knowing nobody, and having anybody around you, even not speaking the language, is the hardest part. So um, it's the process here. It doesn't make easy for the asylum seekers, because like, if the home office doesn't believe you, you might the procedure to get a refugee or a humanitarian protection, it might take years and years and years. So I still remember that was almost 5 years ago. I had to go to court to see my life was in danger, and prove it to the judge, the home office, and everybody. And they were expect me to prove all that by myself at age 15, and put me in the court like I was some criminals or some people who done. With due all respect, but it wasn't so easy. So but no matter what, we need to educate ourselves and learn about the people experience. So there are many people who've been through much worse. That's why I started learning about the law, trying to help other people. Well, how can I help them? What could we do? So accommodation is, for asylum seekers, is one of the biggest issue. Is because now we're talking about the hotels, and a lot of people are placed in hotels, and the home office or the authority, they leave them for over a year or however long, and one day out of nowhere they move them to a totally different city, which it doesn't help. It's like they, in that time they are here, they try to learn and they try to make friends. Of nowhere they moving them to another city is like starting another life again. So helping people with staying accommodation is like, it's really important, and having people around you to help you to understand you, because it's sometimes it's not so easy to put your feeling, your emotion, your experience into words. Like sometimes you can not just say it out loud. Is That's why it's really important. That's why I always tell all the young people, including myself, don't be shy what you've been through. Just say it out loud. Go get help. Just ask for help and see what somebody can offer you. It's like, if you don't ask, you never know. So that was always my advice to the young people. And it's another thing is being here is it's really like what I said is living that life, having experienced that life, and having waiting for your case to resolve, to get a decision, to see what the home office would say. It's like that's another trauma in life, because I lived here for almost 3 years until home office decided on my case. So all these 3 years, I didn't know what I'm gonna do. Whether should I start building a life here, or whether should I think about they would deport me to back home. What would I do? So with all uncertainty, the people don't know what to do. So, and even when I graduated from school, I tried to apply for university. I did not have the refugee right at the time, so it was very difficult for me because they don't cover you for the university, or like school is free, you can attend, but most of the university, they don't accept asylum seekers. So that's another big issue. That's why they are not trying to resolve the case quicker. And also another thing I want to say, because I am a training solicitor at the moment, I work in the firm. So I see a lot of young people, a lot of people who have faced a lot of difficulties to find the legal aids at the moment. As we all know, there is not enough solicitors to help the young people with their cases. So where I work, they are charging almost two and a half grand for each cases for solicitors to see. So that's kind of even a standard. Even there's some solicitors, they charging higher rates. So with all knowledge we have, we need to tell the young people how they can do, where they can find the information, how they could get the information, where they should look for. And as the both speakers said about the support and the charities where they could get some help. And just to summarize everything, I am not the lucky one here to be honest, saying, oh, you know what, I lived that life, and I am the only one who experienced this. So there are a lot of people out there, they need much more help. And I know a lot of people who are going through much worse I've been through, and I know people who their parents passed away before their cases solved, so they never saw, and they never had a chance again to see their parents, to see the people who cares about them. And it's when each day I look at news and I see 500,000 people, asylum seekers, just across the border. I see each individual as the unique story and the struggles they've been through. So we just need to learn and educate ourselves. These are not just numbers of people. This is all matter lives. This is all important lives who have family they care about, who they might for whatever reason they might leave the country and they are seeking to get a better life. So and there are a lot of young people much better than me, much better than a lot of people, and but they did not have the support to shine and be able to contribute to the society. So that's everything from me. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. One of the comments in the chat was from Lisa Mason, was that you should be very proud of how far you have come, and you're an amazing inspiration to young people, and your story is so powerful. I think we'll all would agree with that. And I think the sentiment that you expressed, however, in saying there are others who are experiencing this sometimes maybe worse, is perhaps an indication of just how proud you should be that you're thinking of other people, not just yourself. And so we're very grateful for that contribution and that insight, which I think puts into perspective everybody's contributions about why ultimately we need to stop looking at the numbers, as Shamal said, not listening to the rhetoric, and actually seeing the human beings and the stories and the experiences that people have, especially young people and children whose vulnerability is evident for us all to see, or should be. We do have some questions in the chat. One other one for you, Shamal, was asking you about which law firm you're training at.
So it's an immigration advisor.